Welcome to the Friendly Aussie podcast.
Hey everybody, we're here with Todd Subritzky, Doctor PhD in cannabis, actually health science, but we're leading with cannabis. Hey Todd.
How you going, guys? Thanks for having me. Good to be on the show. I've got to apologise for my lighting over here in my cave, but I'm sorry about that. Not much can be done with it, but there you go.
That's all right.
We do our best.
Great to be here.
We're about the voices here, you know. We're not really about looks. It's why
The whole first season of the podcast was without video, pretty much.
I think we had one video.
Yeah.
So you're into season 2? So
This
this
is season 2. We've classed this year as season 2.
okay, sweet, awesome.
In the ground running.
It doesn't really make sense with our seasons because we started mid-year, then it went for a year and a half, but it doesn't really matter. So we've brought you on to kind of have a chat about maybe a little bit of your studies, what projects are going on, and just kind of how you came to be a cannabis PhD doctor man.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll just give you a brief intro about myself. So I'm originally from New Zealand. Left when I was about 19 and spent quite a bit of time overseas. So I was over there for Europe for about 13 years, then China for about 7 years, and been here in Australia for about 10 or 11 years now. And the reason I mention all that is because I guess my interest really, obviously dabbled in recreational cannabis sort of growing up as you do, but I really got interested in it when I was living in Denmark, in Copenhagen. There's a place over there called Christiania. And so I lived, pardon?
Is that the park?
No, that's Tivoli. That's like that's the thing that Michael Jackson wanted to buy, isn't it?
Yeah. Everyone hypes that up to me.
Now, Christiania is it's sort of a place that's in the center of the city and was founded in the 70s by the hippies. They sort of took over a central part of the city, and in that area, it's sort of like a mini sort of Amsterdam where it's all illegal, but they've created their own sort of state with about 70 people that live there. Amazing place, actually. And if you guys get over to Copenhagen, you should definitely check that out. And I was fascinated by that because that was like a microcosm within society. And at the same time, I was sort of studying over there was sociology. And I don't know, I just sort of connected the two of, you've got in the middle of this like really normal, functioning, well-respected society, there's this sort of like hippie commune that expanded to about 1,000 people that had been there for like 30 years. And it had become so popular, like famous names come over there, like Oasis, and huge bands play in the Christiania, which is called the Free State. So I just got into it then. I was obviously visiting the place regularly because it was fascinating place to people watch or do whatever. But its main claim to notoriety was Pusher Street, which was where they just sold cannabis, just normally, like as if it was Colorado or something like that, But it was all illegal. But the police just sort of turned the blind eye with the sort of once a year raid, So from there, I got interested in it and then wanted to study it further, but never really opportunity just didn't arrive until I was here in Australia and I was looking for something to study. And that just all worked out at the same time as Colorado just been implemented. And I managed to just put a research proposal together out of interest to the National Drug Research Institute. And they sort of said, yes, sweet. And so that's how it came to be, really. And then from there, I sort of got guided by my supervisor and did a few publications and presentations. And really interesting, the people I met, because that was based on Colorado. So I had like 3 trips over there doing field work and interviews with senior regulators. And also it was a huge data set of like the regulations and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, you get into it. But like I say, up until that point, I'd just been sort of consuming regularly, in a sort of just for recreational purposes, I would say. But I really, since I've studied, it opened up this new world to me that I didn't understand, that, hang on a minute, perhaps this was actually partially therapeutic. And you start to find out about things like the endocannabinoid system and also relating your own experience to times when it's actually like helped you, instead of, listening to all the doomsayers that have, basically said it's going to destroy your life the second you touch it, but actually realizing, you know what, this is actually helping me in lots of ways, and I just found it fascinating. Really, it's endlessly fascinating. Never problem.
It just never stops.
There's something new.
A new
Something
use.
that like really, I don't know, like fascinated me when you were talking was like how you brought up the social, the cultural, and the psychological aspects of cannabis in the world we live in, and how there are kind of like areas where social development's occurring that allows for this kind of explosion of weird outsider hippie cultures, where this sort of stuff is normalized. And on the other hand, you have kind of the existing set of norms that are present throughout most countries, most developed countries, that just have to do with a broader rejection of external use of something like cannabis, or external input of cannabinoids into the system, because they don't seem to really understand it as an intricate bodily system that regulates up, down, regulates all of these different systems. Rather, they just see it as cannabis is something that people can get addicted to, become dropouts, and
people just see it as like it's a way to get high.
Yeah.
Right, like it's the same as sniffing paint.
Yeah. So I think that there's a strange kind of, even when you're a regular cannabis user, you downplay, like you said, the positive aspects of what it may be doing that could be unconscious, the reason why you're taking it regularly, and you think that you're an addict. And the negative kind of connotations of being an addict in this society that are just imposed on you from the outside are quite intense.
I absolutely make some excellent points there. And I mean, so what we're talking about now is the stigma, right? And getting over that stigma. And continuing on with that theme, I'll tell you that right now is basically the first time that I've publicly admitted to the world that I've consumed cannabis regularly. Like when I was doing my PhD, I mean, obviously my friends and that know it, but when I was doing my PhD, I was strongly discouraged from mentioning that I consumed, because they said that might bias the research.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so really it's sort of quite liberating for me. And it is, I imagine, in many ways like coming out as sort of someone who's gay or something like that, but it's like that. And
Congratulations.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's been a relief to get it out there. And
I've had similar experiences because I'm in the business world, and you kind of hide it. And what I actually started noticing, people ask me like what else I do, and I'm like, oh, I run a publication. And they're like, oh, what's it about? And I'm like,
I'm a content manager. Oh, what are you really?
And I had to hide it. And then what's funny is I started actually openly talking about what I'm doing, and everyone's like, whoa, you're on the cannabis side. And it's like, that's going to be a huge industry, isn't it? And da. And everyone's suddenly like, I get like 100 questions from them. It's like, oh, is CBD oil actually good for you? Is this? And it's like, how bad is it all? Is there like possible to get legal? Like just a million questions come out of like normal people's perspective of cannabis. And then suddenly my business relationship has actually become so much stronger because I have knowledge that they actually would like to know about. Because they've heard, maybe CBD oil helps with endometritis. I'm so bad with words sometimes.
Yeah.
That's the one. It's that month at the moment. That's why I brought it up. But like, it helps with this, it helps with the back pain, whatever it happens to be. And they've heard that, and they've tried, so many things. And they're like, do you know where I can get CBD oil? And it's, trying to guide them into the legal framework and all of that. But it's weird how, people that before, like I work with like a finance company, and I was like, oh, I need to keep my mouth shut. But as soon as I let it out, they became a client much quicker.
It's funny. It's actually, it's funny. And it's changed a lot in the last couple of years. People are more open to it, and it's more on TV with like, people understanding that it can be helpful and all that. So yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting also, when I've sort of been honest about it, that's when the biggest opportunities have come my way. And I've actually got a mate of mine who was doing finance in London for a few years. And he was telling me one day, he was out the back in some, swanky office in London talking to his boss, and his boss said to him, and this is, by the way, while they were smoking a joint together. And his boss said to him, "Oh, so what do you want out of life?" And he's like, "I want more responsibility. I just want, to take on more roles." And then the next day he's announced as like in charge of London, Singapore. So literally having a smoke with his boss, like catapulted his career,
One of my favorite things is I went to Amsterdam and I went to the cannabis museum there. And one of my favorite, they had I think it was like a painting, and it was depicted somewhere in ancient Arabia and that sort of stuff. And it was showing sheiks and things smoking shisha, which was obviously hashish, with like commoners. And that it was explained as like, it was seen as a way for the higher levels of society to connect with the lower end of society. And
wow.
actually no payment even involved. Like it was just shared. It wasn't even a commodity in a sense. It was just something that was given to people. And that was really nice for me. I really like the idea of, it's you form a connection just because you've had a smoke with them. You become kind of on that same wavelength and you're able to maybe just hit different points that you maybe otherwise wouldn't. You just find like too much difference and it becomes a little too contentious. When you're on that kind of elevated state, you're thinking kind of in the same kind of pattern, which is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think I made it to the museum over there in Amsterdam, but I bet that must have been fascinating. Actually, it would have been good.
It was good. I actually need to put the pictures up. I've got so many and I haven't put them up on Fab. That was like 3 years ago, so I probably should have done it by now.
That's content.
Yeah.
But what both of you have brought up are like really excellent points. That I think one was you mentioned, Joseph, about like feeding people into the legal and regulated system.
Yeah.
That's definitely one of the projects I'm sort of working on at the moment is helping to funnel, because still it's like, I think it's at least 95% of people who are consuming medical cannabis are like consuming it, accessing through the black market. And most of them would much rather have a profession and have a prescription, obviously, and, just do it the legal way, but there's costs. But also they look at it and they've got no idea, like, where do I start? What do I do? So there's a massive...
I feel like that second one has become like really the major barrier in a lot of people's cases. Like monetary can be a big one, but if you're regularly smoking cannabis on the black market, you're probably paying competitive prices to what they're currently offering on the legal scheme.
So what would you call that, about say 400 an ounce?
Well, it depends, like pre-COVID or even middle of COVID, prices in Brisbane were like 350, 400 an Oz. But now, if you want that same quality, you're probably paying 455, maybe even more. It's very hard to find the quality. I think maybe it's just been a little bit of raids or something and it's impacted. Maybe the bushfires have made an impact. But I think the demand has just skyrocketed. People are at home. They've probably built like a little bit more of an attitude towards smoking cannabis regularly rather than drinking.
I think people got pickier too.
People also got pickier. They want quality. So on the medical end, depending on what you're going, but like there's a few varieties that are like $13, $14 a gram.
Right.
That's to like 400, 450 an ounce on top of your consult fees and all of that. But like the quality is so consistent and guaranteed. It's almost a no-brainer at this point.
It's a product.
Yeah, it's a real product. I think the only problem we've got is there's about 6,000 medical patients coming on a month. And I think the supply is not matching up. So there's constantly product shortages of flowers that people have gotten used to and really started to appreciate. But then they're like, oh, there's no stock till May. And that happened in December. So 6 months nearly.
Yeah, that's not good enough. That's why I think the home grow component is so important, that people should be able to grow their own medicine, because that's basically the only way they can guarantee some sort of consistency, isn't it?
No doubt.
I'm dreaming of a day I can just have a hydroponic setup. Like I am dreaming for that day.
Yeah.
And you know what? The fact that they've got some of that occurring in Canberra in a limited sense.
That's a good trial. 2-4 plants. Yeah.
I think that actually creates an opportunity for other states.
Hopefully. Yeah, we can. Hopefully. I mean, it's just, what I find is a bit ridiculous. We don't want to spend too much time on ranting at politicians, I think, because there's more interesting things to discuss. But
certainly,
honestly, it's just, belligerent in the face of all the evidence that they can.
Yeah, the
sides
politics
like,
is so wonked out. It's
Yeah.
completely off.
Mhm.
we won't bother going there.
And what's frustrating is it's not even like it's up for discussion. That's what I think what irritates me most. It's like, nope, this is perfect. We've never done a better law. That's how it seems.
Not even
Yeah.
that we're saving lives with these laws.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
If we weren't locking your kids up and ruining the rest of their careers, they'd be in big trouble.
So what was your research based on in Colorado?
Yeah, so basically, I had to do it through a public health lens, which means sort of looking at the harms and reducing harm. So it was sort of a public health, was done within a harm reduction framework, which is, the amount of times I had to bite my lip because one of the findings was, the trouble with the harm reduction framework is by definition, it can't investigate benefits, they don't fit into the framework. So, the trouble is with when it comes to research in Australia, if you want to do mostly research into cannabis, the funding is there for finding harmful components, not so much for the beneficial stuff. Although there are more clinical trials now being sponsored by industry, but it's still, in terms of pure research, most of it's, harm reduction, and harm identification more than anything. So what mine was about was basically the implementation of the recreational cannabis market in Colorado. So they legalized it in November 2012, and then it was implemented on the 1st of January in 2014. So it was looking closely at that first 13 months of how it was passed, what they did in those 13 months to prepare, and then from there, then the next 4 years of issues that came up during those 4 years of implementation, and just making some recommendations, especially around, things like trying to avoid over commercialization and giving too much power to industry, and sort of trying to ensure that there's a craft market. Testing was a massive issue that was, I know you've done some work on your website about PGRs and stuff like that. When they first legalized in Colorado, it was, there's no systems in place to accurately test the cannabis. And so they were getting, when they were doing tests, they were still getting 30% of the samples were returning with, high toxicality pesticides and PGRs and all that sort of stuff. So for the 5 years, they've just refined and improved the regulations. But one of the main findings was you can't just make one set of rules and that's it. It's just continuously evolves over the next 5 years, perfecting it. And then it also depends on the leadership. The gubernatorial leadership's changed over there since the start. So the first guy, Hickenlooper, he was against it, but the people voted for it. So he just went along and implemented it. But now the new governor is very supportive and wants to grow the industry. So he's taken away a lot of the regulations that were, for example, stopping interstate commerce and really pushing it as an economic driver, So there's a big difference in their policy now based on just the leadership, but also with just over years of experience learning and refining the policy.
That's really, really cool.
It is
the fact that you've got this kind of developing legal framework. Policy.
That's what it is. Yeah, it's a dynamic framework, So rather than static, which is what most people think it is. So you've got to have a system that is able to quickly and efficiently change. If there's some new law that's come out that's causing actually more problems or that needs to be resolved. One of the ones, for example, in Colorado was, kids were eating the gummy bear lollies and sort of ODing on that, obviously not dying, but having maybe a traumatic experience for a few hours. Stuff like that. I mean, what they say was, of course, the headline is, accidental poisonings increased by 1,000% in Colorado. But what they don't give is the context, which is it started at 3% per month, and now it's at 3.5% of accidental poisonings in the state, Yeah. And of the other 97%, which are household chemicals, most of them, deaths out of that. But none of that's reported. So, they can easily focus in on the harms to promote their agenda if they want to. That's the trouble with stats, you can use them for anything.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how media sources and government sources and all different kinds of authorities will use framing to just, narrow down onto their agenda. But like one thing I wanted to ask you, I guess, seeing as you've studied kind of the development of the legal framework in Colorado, I wanted to kind of maybe have a discussion about its strengths and weaknesses, where perhaps things were under-regulated or over-regulated. What your opinions are on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, you're never really going to get any sort of agreement on that, depending on where your start point is. Like, the start point is like, say, the National Drug Research Institute. They're based at where I studied. They're based at Curtin Uni. Their priority is to reduce harm, right? So for them, the biggest issue coming out of it is like the commercialization, advertising, targeting youth. And for all that, that's the worst situation. So again, it really depends where you're coming from. If you're an advocate that just wants human rights to grow their own medicine, then that becomes more of an issue, like around how you regulate plants, whether it's per house or whether there's caregivers who do their grows, community grows, social clubs. They've all got different models in the academic literature, and so all of them have different advantages and different disadvantages, and it all really depends on what your objectives at the start of legalization are. So, for me personally, because I'm so fascinated by the industry, I'd love to be able to make a living out of it, whether that meant like having a dispensary or whatever. I mean, I've got enough projects going on all over the place, but none of them pay any actual money. So it's all just for the love of it, So ideally for me, I don't need to be some massive chain or anything like that, but it'd be nice to be able to grow, say, a craft product and then, coach people, educate them on the ways to use that in the most efficient way, because it's been done organically, and really you're basically immediately wiping out 99.9% of the potential harms, but opening up a world of potential benefit that's relatively untouched,
That's right, yeah.
That's the way, that's what I'd love to see.
Businesses, in Australia, where, they've been struggling across the board for a while now. If you opened up kind of the diversity of a craft or artisan market and really supported the small producers and limited the large ones, I think you'd see maybe different development in the industry here than in other places.
I feel like that's just not going to happen here, though.
It probably won't, because of our existing leadership, if it signs on to something like cannabis legalization, it's probably going to be quite conservative in its approach.
Incredibly corporate, just incredibly corporate. Like, you can't even get maybe like a small boutique medical grow happening. You need to invest so many millions of dollars to pretty much get going.
Yeah.
It's pretty much impossible for anyone. I was talking to my mum and her friend, and I was explaining like the whole medical side of the cannabis industry now and how it's actually possible to get it in Australia. And my mum's friend was just blown away. But she's got a bit of land, and she's like, well, when can I start growing? Like, I'd love to be able to make some money on that. And she's actually a botanist. So it's unfair that, there's people that probably could produce amazing product, and you could probably still have their products tested. It's not like you wouldn't test these small businesses. But
exactly, yeah.
It's just, I just don't see anything like that happening here.
Well, like an existing problem is like the fact that people who have grown weed in Australia for years and years and have, knowledge that is basically elder knowledge, they're not able to enter into the medicinal space to enrich these spaces that are creating scientific conditions to control these grows.
Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous, and there's such a waste of knowledge and know-how. I mean, it's a whole generation's worth of knowledge that's basically untapped. And there's so much. And just talking about ways that could potentially be regulated, one of the models about that that I touched on in my research is called the Appalachian Model, which basically incentivizes different areas, because obviously you have different growth conditions in different areas. So the cannabis that's grown in, by you guys around northern New South Wales is going to be different than from South Australia or Sydney or wherever. And so one way to sort of regulate that, but to encourage it, is you could have like Nimbin branded products, and then Sydney style or Brisbane style, whatever, and that's all licensed because it has these specific, it has to meet these conditions, which include these, maybe this gene of seeds or this particular soil samples, or it's undergone this excellent testing process, or
Can I just say that sounds awesome, because it seems like something that tourists would get into.
oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, that'd be a big draw card for tourism, cannabis tourism, absolutely.
I was thinking like, you know, the wine industry, and, you know, people talk about the Yarra Valley and, you know,
Exactly. Yeah.
Imagine like, well, this is from the hills of South Australia. And
but that's what that model's based on. That Appalachian's model's based on the wine industry. Exactly. So behind it. Yeah.
No, that'd be really, really cool. Like just globally, could you imagine like, oh, I've got this really nice stuff from Afghanistan. I've got this really nice stuff from Croatia, and it's like,
Jamaica,
you know, and it's
Northern
like
California, Colombia.
It would change the game for like a lot of, you know, how people go out and find genetics in land races and stuff.
Yeah.
It would completely change the game, because local areas where those genetics emerged could then start to market themselves based upon that. Everyone's like, holy shit, that's where these genetics emerged.
Yeah.
Be a real diversity in the global cannabis market if global authorities and regulatory bodies decided to relax regulations. You see that kind of happening most recently in kind of the UN and in the WHO. But that's probably like what, decades coming? And it's going to take a long time for states to kind of follow, I believe. At least
definitely. And the other thing that ties into that a little bit, where it gets a bit blurred, is because if you start just relying on indoor growth, that takes away a lot of the environmental diversity, or you're not careful. So that can then start blurring it. But yeah, you're right. In a world like that, wouldn't that be fantastic? You know, when you had that sort of choice, and you know, and also if you were actually documenting it and realizing how this particular one can be more helpful for some things and this one for others. I mean, it's never ending.
I think what's really interesting
for knowledge
with cannabis is, I think when we talk about strains and all of this being like, you know, useful for this is helpful for sleep, this is helpful for pain, it actually still comes down to the individual more than the species, strains, species.
Yep.
Which is, I think, really interesting, because like I was getting Afghan Kush from the doctor, Medican product, CC01. Really loved it. And it was meant for my insomnia. It was meant to help with sleep. And actually it did for a little bit, but very quickly I built a tolerance. Body completely collapses. Like it's completely relaxed, but the mind stays awake. And it's actually almost like lucid dreaming. It almost feels like that. So still conscious in the head. And I was like, this isn't good for sleep for me. And then we swapped over and I got the Canatrek Jerusalem, the T17. Now I'm out like a light. I finally found something that's really, really great for sleep for me. But I've heard other people with the Afghan, no problems. They sleep on that really, really well as well. So
yeah, well, so how long have you been on this new one? And has there been a chance for you to build up your tolerance for the new one yet?
Sorry, what was that?
Have you had a chance to build up the tolerance for the new one yet?
I mean, I've had it for maybe 3 weeks now, I think, the new one. So we'll see how it goes. I've been using it very sparingly for just the sleep. I'm trying to really be intentional around it. Like, this is the sleep one. This is the only thing I will use for the sleep, like before bed for maybe an hour and a half. While other ones, you know, they could be a bit of a daytime or early evening sort of thing for me. But I'm trying to mindset it wise to this is for sleep.
Yeah. No, but isn't that great that in a regulated market you can actually do that, because you can get a consistent product, even if you can't get it, you know, when you need it, but you can identify, okay, that one's not working for me, but this one, I mean, the black market, legacy market, whatever you want to call it, it's all, you know, at the end of the day, it's just pot luck. You have no idea what you're getting, no idea what strain it is. And I mean, even that was another issue actually that came up when I was looking at Colorado, was strain names, because there's nothing, it's based on nothing except marketing, really. One guy wins a cannabis cup.
It would be better if it was more phylogenetic, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah, much better, and it was actually properly stamped and all that sort of stuff, so you could, you know, like really know what it is. But I mean, I came across examples where there was like I'd read about a Cannabis Cup winning strain. So, oh yeah, I want to check that one out. That sounds good. When you get there, then you find out it's just some other companies just called it the same strain just because someone else has won the Cannabis Cup.
That's the worst.
All genetically related,
Yeah,
made up basically to sell.
There'll be a lot of difficulty in regulation, to be honest, as it keeps coming through.
Labeling and in terms of like maybe the genotype and phenotype of
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can see it going the way of like, what is it, the corn seed with Monsanto, where they've reduced it down from thousands of species to like there's like 10 different species now, and that's what it's heading, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's the
that happening
of this kind of broader approach to legalization, a kind of homogenization of our genetic inheritance, which
absolutely, it's a major risk.
Commercialization potentially.
Yep.
Yeah. How weird would it be if you only had like a choice of 5 strains and it was like, this is all you've got for the rest of your life?
Gotta stop that from happening.
Yeah. I mean, the tolerance wouldn't take long for the tolerance to
build up.
Work
It's just a fascinating time. Like for me, I just love looking at the flower. Like everyone being completely individual in its own right. It's actually like a thing of beauty. And I think that's something that politicians probably just don't understand. Like,
definitely not.
There's an actual appeal about like the cannabis itself, just in terms of a look and a feel and a smell and everything. And that adds to the entire experience.
Especially the smell, like it just feels like I'm walking through a garden.
It smells great. I mean, I don't often come across very pungent stuff my way. It's all sort of pretty dried and shriveled, unfortunately, but that's just that's the nature of the beast, I guess. But yeah, absolutely, I'm a big fan of that when I do get to smell it. Mind you, when I was over in Colorado visiting those big grows, sometimes it got a bit overwhelming. It was a bit sickening at times. It was just like, whoa.
Yeah, I went to the Cannatrek farm, and that was, it was like walking into heaven, but like after a little while, you're like, yeah, okay.
Can be quite strong, It's like that.
So Todd, I'm wondering, you talked about the benefits of cannabis that you discovered as like when you started smoking recreationally or throughout your whole life. What benefits do you find that it helps you with?
Yeah, so with me, I've got like 3 main things. And so one of them is like, I'll say fitness. Like I used to just pretty much binge drink all the time and also have a few smokes, but I've wound back the binge drinking a lot, and I just took 3 months completely off the booze, but then at the same time started bike riding, and I do a couple of puffs before I go for a bike ride, and I get into the zone. I can do like 50 Ks, and it's just clears the mind, wellness, mindfulness. You're into the breathing, but also much more stamina, and it's much more interesting. And I go for faster as well. So I find for me doing fit physical exercise, it's a massive help. That's one.
You're telling me it's a performance enhancing drug.
I've actually argued that it is. Yeah. I mean, guys in the NBA all like smoking before they go on the court. I argue that in some cases it can be, because it can help you get into the zone. And when you're in the zone, whether you're working creatively, working on your day job, or actually competing in sport, it can help you get there. It really can. So I believe it.
Even professional sport, probably the only thing you want to do is have it in some kind of oil, so that you don't have the respiratory symptoms.
Yeah, right. I mean, obviously, take it in the way that's least harmful to the...
I reckon that would actually work remarkably well on a lot of athletes.
I do too.
THC oil or...
Yeah. Well, the whole thing is, I follow the UFC a little bit, and you've got like the Diaz brothers, and they'll like sit there after the thing, smashing a CBD pen. And the regulations relaxed a little bit in Nevada now since they've legalized, and because that's where most of the events are, they're now kind of like allowed to. Before it was like a little iffy and all of this, but they hype it up so much as like a way to relax their muscles and everything like that. And I think one or two, like a couple of them also smoke before they fight. And that was starting to raise questions. And But then it's like, you've been telling us for like 100 years that it makes you dopey and slow.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of examples out there. The swimmer, Phelps, I mean, Bolt, he loves a bit of a smoke. It's So yeah, I mean, definitely can be advantageous, but not always. Like on the other hand, it comes back to the drug setting, right? You know, your frame of mind, and it's sort of an enhancer of that. So if you're like in a not very good mood and you're feeling like, oh, I haven't done what I'm supposed to be doing, and then you consume, then it can have the opposite impact with me anyway and bring me down further, you know. So
You feel that a lot.
work on it. But for me, the other two things are sleep, like you mentioned. I've had chronic insomnia for ages, so trying to find something that.
High five, let's join that club.
Yeah, and I mean, I know how horrible that is. That's just debilitating when you can't sleep for like sometimes, especially if you're really focused on a project. Like when I was doing the final write-up for that PhD, it was just
it's just constant.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I need to do this and this and this and this. Wait,
Yeah.
what if I search this up? And it's like unbelievable.
But it's very also with me strain specific with that because I never know what I'm getting. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You know, the only thing I've noticed consistently that does help with that is the ones with sort of high CBN content, which is degraded THC, which is basically old weed. The older it is, and if it hasn't been stored well, the better it is helping me to sleep. But the less enjoyable it is to smoke. You know.
That I find you get a lot out of if you're into vaping. So your AVB, that becomes basically CBN if you've stored it up for a little while. And I normally end up with probably 4 or 5 ounces of AVB every 6-7 months. And then I'll turn that into coconut oil. And then that can just be thrown into anything. I'll put it in a curry and then, off to bed in an hour.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome. That's really getting the most out of it, isn't it? Personally, not a fan of vaping. To me, I found I didn't get the same level of intoxication, to be honest. So, although from my research, from a public health perspective, I have to recommend using a vaporizer. You know,
I swapped to the vape. I don't know, pretty early when I started. To be honest, I was on bongs and joints and all of that. And I just found the vape tech like fascinating. I'm like, oh, that's really cool, just because I'm a tech guy.
Yeah. That is interesting.
I saw the efficiency of it, and as I got a better vaporizer, that's where the effect actually hit me stronger. Like if I have a good vape, no problem. Like,
so it's not temperature related; it's actually device related.
I relate it to the device. The temperature has an impact 100%. I normally start at like 175 and slowly work my way up to about 190, 200.
Yeah.
Some people like to go up to 220. I personally don't like it that hot. But I like starting low, working my way up. And then if I need more, I'll have another chamber. But I find how much it conserves for me unbelievable because one, I'm getting the benefit from reusing the AVB, but two, I have one chamber and it's maybe the size of a cone, maybe a cone and a half. And it's like, I wouldn't get nearly that longevity otherwise.
Yeah, right.
I'm still very much a fan of having a joint. God, I love joints.
Yeah, well, I gave up cigarettes about 10 years ago, so I just love that pleasurable, feeling. Yeah, but that's right though. Talking about consistency of product earlier, but you just mentioned consistency in dosage as well, which is what you can do much more easily with the vape than you can.
There's a lot of benefits from vaping that just are unique as a result of how technologically advanced they are, I suppose, in some ways, in comparison to just combusting.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, like, I don't know, maybe it's the nostalgia and the experiences and the moments that I've forged with cannabis, but I seem to appreciate pretty much all of the administration methods.
Well, that's all right then. So no dramas. But do you find some different administration methods work for better ailments? Like, say, if you want to go to sleep, you prefer like maybe a cookie or some oil, or
actually, I do
situations
in the morning and before I go to bed.
Cookies, you said.
I generally find that like when I do that. And when I smoke, either in the morning, when I smoke, I have to be like conservative about it. I guess I can't really, sink a lot of bongs and then expect to get a lot of work done. I suppose. In the evening, if I want to, sit with my own mind and maybe read a book or, do some writing, I can just, wind myself down over the course of a few hours by occasionally turning to the bong or to a joint or whatever.
Yeah.
I have a vaporizer as well, but I get less use out of it than I do the other methods, generally speaking, if I'm honest.
Yep.
Mitch is a bong lord. I'm a vape lord. That's how it is. Yeah, for me, I really do love my vaping. In terms of edibles, though, I do like the edibles in the night. They do help me sleep, but what I don't like is they make me a little groggy in the morning. You kind of get that after effect where you feel a little heavy, disjointed. I almost feel like it's being hungover. It's a very, very
Yeah.
similar feeling. And if I have the medical oil that I've been prescribed right before bed or like really soon before I try and sleep, I will wake up almost stumbling. Like it's actually like I'm worse than being drunk. So what I found is I actually have to take it about 3-4 hours before I attempt to sleep if I want to wake up feeling pretty good.
Yeah, well,
Generally, I don't like to use the edibles too much before bed, just because of the grogginess factor. And then daytime wise, I don't smoke during the mornings. Like I just choose not to. I find I function better, um, quite a lot better actually, without cannabis in me. But then 2 to 4 o'clock comes around and I kind of get a tension that builds up in my shoulders. It's almost like an anxiety, but I wouldn't say I'm anxious. I've just kind of, I don't know, just something builds up, maybe a bit of stress, a bit of just tension is what I call it. And I'll have a little vape and I won't even finish a whole chamber. Maybe it's 10, 15 puffs. I get a little buzz, but that tension just drops. And suddenly I enter flow state and I just start working. And I'm actually starting to then get into that gratitude and that appreciation for what I do. And the cannabis really just helps with that. So, and then I'll vape into the evening for, I don't know, however many hours.
well, that's a classic example. If you, especially if you're aware yourself of how you can sort of enter that state, that's for me the optimal state because that's when you're the most productive, wired, and you can actually just like it's incredible the work you can get through really and just stay focused without any distractions and stuff. So
Yeah.
it definitely can be productive when you do
The
that.
only problem is when you overdose, right? Like you have a little too much and then you're like, what was I doing? And you kind of just get lost into your like train of thought and everything. That's the worst bit about cannabis because it is a little addictive. You're like, oh, I want to be a little more buzzed. But you know, you gotta have that regulation. And we refer to it as our relationship with cannabis. We have to always reevaluate how we're using it and developing that relationship.
That's a great point. And, you know, for me, it's really, like I said, I started out sort of just recreational. I never even gave it any thought. It was just like, I just want to get high. There was nothing else to do. I'm bored, whatever. And it wasn't until I learned that you had to be disciplined with it and like control it and use it in situations when it's going to be beneficial, but not like harmful to you. That's what I consider that I evolved from using it sort of recreationally to more for therapeutic purposes. And then yeah, like basically what you alluded to is sort of setting yourself goals before you consume it. Like, why am I actually consuming it at the moment? Is it just to get whacked, or do I actually want it to help me with one of my conditions or whatever, you know? So, yeah, I totally agree with what you just said, actually.
Yeah, I think it's super, super important. I think part of the stigma that needs to change is that kind of habitual cannabis use we see, you know, like people smoking from morning to night and then people looking at them in a negative light because they maybe not achieving what they want to be doing, or should be doing. I think like that kind of culture needs to be kind of weeded out. You know, we've got a big fight against this kind of stoner cannabis culture where it's like, I get high every day, man, doesn't impact me, but like you can visually see that they're not quite as conscious as they maybe should be during that time. Perhaps they're using it more in a medicinal end, but you know, they might not even know that they're doing that, and then they can't even explain that to the other people that are seeing them in that negative light.
In many
Yeah.
ways, it's just acknowledging that like people do turn to something like cannabis often for uh, external support where they're lacking the kind of internal constitution, or they're lacking the kind of, again, systems or structures from the outside, their friends, their family, you know, resources that they can call upon, skills, knowledge, discipline. You know, all of these things I think really matter when it comes to what your relationship with cannabis is like and how it evolves. And if you're in a position where you feel very alone, and I guess you don't necessarily know how to confront your own psychological issues directly, or really face them without without taking on, I guess, an altered state of consciousness or numbing the pain or something like that. I think that's actually I don't know, an expression of someone trying to cope. And in that sense, people in those situations, they demand and kind of, they deserve in many ways compassion from, you know, cannabis advocates. But that isn't the kind of behavior that we're trying to advocate on a broader scale. Like, you know, often we're mischaracterized with this idea that we're just fine with mass sections of the population like checking out. No, the whole point is to address these mental health problems that simmer under the surface, not just with cannabis, but with other drugs. And I think they have really detrimental impacts on our society that we don't acknowledge. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, a couple of interesting points you make there. I mean, one is kind of numbing the pain. That's like, I think why it can be such an effective tool for things like PTSD and stuff like that. But is it really like getting to the core issue though, or is that just helping temporarily to alleviate the symptoms?
Sure.
It's a great point that you make. And yeah, like for me, what I found was a lot of it, for it to be considered beneficial is around the concept just of achievement. Like, it doesn't actually matter what it is, but if I've achieved something and I have a bit of a, you know, light dosage, that's going to elevate me and definitely put me in a better place where I'm feeling great. But if I've done something that I feel good, then, you know, as we were sort of talking about before, then it's going to exacerbate the situation where I'm thinking, feeling guilty, and of actually using that stigma that society has on myself. You're not good enough. What are you doing? Why haven't you done this? And it just sets in motion a whole chain of negative thoughts, which if I had of at first just done something, even if it could just be like doing the dishes, something simple, you get some sort of task accomplished before just diving into it. And for me, that's like a central part of it being beneficial rather than detrimental.
That's really insightful, I think, because yeah, cannabis enhances your experience, and if you're on a positive or negative spiral, you're gonna,
You'll just keep pushing it.
Yeah. So that's why, because I think all of us, all three of us, are in the same sort of field at the moment, which is really trying to educate people who might have been consuming for a long time, transitioning to a legal but an actual beneficial sort of way of consumption. Because I know there's lots of people out there, myself included, definitely used to have just negative patterns of consumption. And if you can reduce the sort of perpetuating, you know, issue and just turn it around so that it's perpetuating but in a positive way, then, you know, that's how I see my role in sort of educating people, you know, just do it in a way that's helpful rather than harmful, you know. And
that's how we look at it as well, really. It's like why we do what we do.
It's an important role. We're really glad that there are people out there who are doing it, because, you know, this is like you say, a microcosm of the broader issue.
It is, it really is, yeah. Yeah. And so just for example, there was a guy, this is when I had my sort of a twig a couple of weeks ago when I realized all this, or even a week ago. This guy called me up and, you know, so he'd been consuming for like 16 years, but, you know, he just wanted some help to sort of, you know, he didn't even know about the endocannabinoid system. I mean, I was the same. I only found out about that a few years ago, and I'd sort of, you know, so many years knew nothing about it. But just telling people that, you know what, it is actually, you know, fully connected to the body, and moderating the well-being and of how the body functions. It's really important, but it is so hard to do it in like a black market unless you've got a consistent supplier. I mean, I know one or two people that are lucky enough to have a consistent supplier, but most people I know, it's hit and miss. Could be anything, you know. I mean, just usually around my area, it's just roided up, shriveled PGR crap And, and then it's just a case of whether it's freshly harvested or months old and just about into bud rot stage. There's not a lot of quality around me anyway. I'm not sure about the local guys, but it's just the way it is. So that's sort of also for me, because I have sinus issues. So the second there's any PGR in there, I just get completely blocked nose and I can't speak. And it's just, so finding something that doesn't, so I can still breathe through my nose is helpful. That's a good score for me. When I find stuff that's not bloody, just making me debilitating through the nose. So yeah,
You've got an easy way to tell.
One of my goals is advocating for a system that definitely includes home grow. That's got to be a component, and also social clubs but with the clubs themselves coming up with the cultivation regulations and any maybe consumption regulations, not like the government, because there's, even from a harm reduction perspective, which is the perspective I did my research in, but it's not the one that I actually believe, and myself and my heart. The framework, my academic framework is the spectrum of wellness and the wheel of wellness and just holistic approach, and then ways of tweaking all those different components within the wellness: spiritual, sexual, psychological, nutritional, all that, but adding bits of cannabis in those sorts of situations is what is my framework that I like to work with. I'm working with people, not like academic research I'm talking about. So yeah, sorry, I went a bit off track there. I can't remember what I started about talking about, but it was
the clubs.
Oh yeah, so yeah, the clubs. I mean, the models that I've studied, their regulations and are made by growers and consumers themselves, and actually are far better, more flexible than any that the government's come up with. So yeah, I'd love to see a model where social clubs are legalized.
My dream is a social club that's a jazz lounge that you have board games at, and it's a vape lounge.
Oh yeah, wicked.
That's a dream of mine. That or Canna Joe's Pizzeria. Stay tuned.
Mine's an opium den.
Stay tuned.
No, but yeah, I mean, so much we could talk about, honestly. But that's why it's great to talk to you guys, because often, the word, like you say, in the business world, my day job, I sort of lecture on health research methods at university, and it's that's
a bit dry.
Yeah, let's put it. Yes, and not a lot of
not very dank.
I'm glad that someone's inside of the academy trying to make change. That's all I'm trying to say, because as a graduate from undergraduate uni,
yep.
3 years, that was doing like politics and philosophy and reading all of those words. That was a lot. So I can't believe, like, doing that for how long did you do it for? How long?
About 5 years. Yeah.
5 years. That's ages. That's all I'm going to say on the topic.
Yeah, it was long.
We're running out of time because we've been going almost an hour.
Yep.
I want to just get into what projects you kind of have going on.
Yep. So at the moment, I've got 4 different projects, really. So one is like consulting. I've done a bit of consulting work for some of the analysts in the city, and also did some work for some pharmacists in Colorado, and actually, no, that was in Nevada. They were entering with the UFC guys looking to, so just did a bit of research for them. So there's that. Not many projects on there at the moment. The other one is cannabis education. So I've built this LMS and really just trying to put just as much education up there as possible, really high quality, not only academic, but also for consumers. Like this, the people that we're talking about, people that know cannabis but don't know cannabis, been consuming for a long time but not knowing the best ways to do it. That's that. So looking for content for that, really. And I'm working on, as part of that, I'm working on a lecture and book series, which is Cannabis Wellness in Theory and Practice, which is trying to get that done. That's mainly based on my thesis, converting my thesis to a book, but then adding my practical experience and then using the wellness framework, which is just the different components I measured before.
That's a good time.
Pardon?
That sounds like a really good time.
Yeah, thanks. I'm interested in that, but it's finding time on it because, you know, the 4 subjects I'm teaching at the university this semester, and it's sort of I've got my head all around them. The other one, I've got this website, it's called Medical Cannabis Doctors, which .com.au, which was basically, I set that up 4 years ago as soon as it was legalized, and it's sort of a directory for identifying clinics and prescribing doctors. But my big news is for that, I've decided to actually turn that into a nuts and bolts clinic. So I'll hire some prescribing doctors, but I'll do the pre-screening of patients. I picked up my first patient the other day, so I'll do pre-screening and just exactly as you said, just helping transition them really from the black market to, you know, a not monitored, but working in partnership with them to not after they've been prescribed, and, you know, using tools like dosing diaries and just helping with their overall wellness and everything we've sort of been talking about.
Have you gone and had a look at the dude who made the On Tracker app?
Yeah, I know him. I've met him a few times, and I made a video with him in the past. I've worked together with him in the past. So
Awesome.
I was going to talk to you about him. Yeah, he's,
no, I've been meaning to reach out and connect with him. I've just been flat out with my own.
yeah.
Well, so.
No, he's pretty good. He's actually that's a great app, and I think anyone that is consuming cannabis like medically, definitely that's a way to go. There's a few different apps you can use, but that one's like really good because you can track which dosage against, you know, all the different variables and your mood and stuff like that.
There's that, and then
I was going to bring up the international questionnaire for cultivation. Have you heard of that, Todd?
Yeah, I have actually. That's run by one of my supervisor, Professor Lenton. He's one of the guys for the Australian one on that. That's the Cannabis Cultivation Consortium or something, is it?
That's right.
Yeah.
ICCC RC or something.
Yeah. So yeah, I know quite a few of the guys running those programs, and yeah, if you're interested in participating or anything like that, I can definitely put you in touch with those guys. I reckon it's interesting because they sort of do run surveys with actual growers and people who sort of live in the real world rather than like textbook stuff, you know what I mean?
We've
So
pushed it out to our audience, trying to get some of them, and I've had quite a few people say they've done it and ask for a link and that sort of thing. So
there's actually been a good back and forth between one of the researchers that we've had, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of, Josip and I will be part of kind of stewardship of some of that research from the.
oh yeah, well, that'll be awesome because they come out with like reports every year, you know. So I'm sure any way that it's and helping to disseminate and sort of, you know, provide insights to their findings and you know, considered in the real world context, people are definitely going to be interested in that. So that's a great piece, I think.
Yeah, we're really keen too.
Yeah,
just to be part of it.
Yeah, nice to just be included.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I know they're always looking for people as well to sort of be part of it, but yeah, they never included me in that, which was a bit of a shame because I thought we're already set up before I came along. But I tried to muscle my way in, but they're like, "Yeah, nah, thanks, mate." So anyway.
Well, you're on to bigger, better things. We want to.
Yeah, well, you know, I think the hard part really is just finding in your heart what it is you're trying to do, you know, and sometimes once you figure that out, then it just suddenly falls into place, you know. So
that's it.
Times.
Any final words, boys?
Not really. I think, you know, great to talk to you both, and hopefully we'll keep in touch.
Well, definitely.
It's been great to speak with you. It'd be lovely to do this again. So,
yeah, maybe later in the year or something. But yeah, well, good luck with the rest of season 2. You know.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Cheers, guys. Have a good one.